The whistle shrieked across the prairie as Adelaide Morrison pressed her gloved hand against the train window, watching Mineral Point materialize through the dust like a mirage that refused to disappear. She had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she had never met, carrying nothing but 2 carpetbags and a secret that walked with her every step. The accident 3 years ago had left her right leg shorter than the left, twisted just enough that her gait rolled unevenly, marking her as damaged goods in the eyes of most men back in Philadelphia. But James Whitmore had written such beautiful letters, promising that he needed a wife, not a racehorse, and she had believed him enough to board this iron beast, heading west into Wisconsin territory in the spring of 1878. The train lurched to a stop at the small wooden platform, steam hissing into the crisp April air. Adelaide gathered her belongings, her heart hammering against her corset stays as she prepared to meet her future husband. She descended the steps carefully, her limp more pronounced after sitting for so many hours. The platform bustled with activity as passengers disembarked and cargo was unloaded. She scanned the crowd for a man matching James's description, but no one stepped forward to claim her. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour. The other passengers dispersed into town or were collected by waiting families. Adelaide stood alone with her bags, the wind tugging at her bonnet ribbons. A knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. Perhaps James had changed his mind. Perhaps he had glimpsed her uneven walk from a distance and decided a crippled bride was too much burden after all. "You look lost, miss." The voice came from her left, rough and warm like aged whiskey. Adelaide turned to find a man leaning against a wooden post, one boot crossed over the other. He wore dusty brown trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a weathered hat that shadowed his face. When he straightened and came closer, she saw he was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of summer grass. A silver star glinted on his vest. "I am waiting for someone," Adelaide said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. James Whitmore, do you know him?" Something flickered across the man's face, concern mixed with something heavier. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. "I'm Sheriff Xavier Whitlock, madam. I'm afraid I have some difficult news about James Whitmore." The world seemed to tilt beneath Adelaide's feet. "Is he unwell? Has something happened?" "James died 2 weeks ago, madam. There was an accident at the lumber mill where he worked. A chain snapped and he was caught in the machinery. It was quick, if that brings any comfort." Xavier's voice held genuine sympathy. "We tried to send a telegram east, but we only had his brother's address in Illinois, and I suppose the message did not reach you in time to stop your journey." Adelaide felt all the blood drain from her face. She had sold everything she owned to buy that train ticket. She had said goodbye to the only home she had ever known, to the aunt who had raised her after her parents died. She had pinned every hope on this new beginning, and now those hopes lay as shattered as her leg had been 3 years ago. "I see," she whispered, though she did not see at all. The platform swayed beneath her, or perhaps that was just her own unsteadiness. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff." Xavier stepped closer, his hand hovering near her elbow as if he feared she might collapse. "Do you have family back east? Enough money for a return ticket?" Adelaide shook her head mutely. She had spent nearly every cent she possessed getting here, keeping only a few dollars for emergencies. Certainly not enough to carry her back across half the country. "Right," Xavier said quietly. He picked up both her carpetbags as easily as if they weighed nothing. "Then we had better figure out what comes next. You look like you could use a hot meal and a place to sit down properly. My office is just down the street, and Mrs. Chen runs a boarding house 2 blocks over. She is a good woman, takes in ladies who need respectable lodging." Adelaide wanted to protest that she could not accept charity, that she would find her own way, but her throat had closed around the words. She simply nodded and followed as Xavier began walking down the dusty main street. His pace was long and easy, the stride of a man who covered ground efficiently. After a few steps, he glanced back and saw her struggling to keep up, her limp making her half skip to match his speed. Without a word, he slowed. His gait shifted into something more measured, almost leisurely, as if he had all the time in the world and no particular destination in mind. He adjusted his stride so perfectly to hers that they moved together with an odd sort of rhythm, her uneven step matching his deliberate one. "Better?" he asked, not looking at her, his eyes scanning the street ahead. "You do not have to do that," Adelaide said, embarrassed heat crawling up her neck. "I can manage." "I know you can," Xavier replied simply, "but there is no race to win here. Town will still be standing whether we get there in 2 minutes or 5. Something about his easy acceptance made Adelaide's eyes sting with unexpected tears. Most people either rushed ahead and left her struggling to catch up, or they slowed with exaggerated patience that made her feel like an invalid. Xavier did neither. He just walked as if this pace was exactly where he wanted to be. Mineral Point revealed itself as they moved down the main thoroughfare. Buildings of weathered wood and local limestone lined the street, evidence of the town's mining past visible in the old shaft houses dotting the surrounding hills. Signs advertised a general store, a blacksmith, a newspaper office, 2 saloons, and a modest church with a white painted steeple. People moved about their business, some pausing to nod respectfully at Xavier. "Mineral Point used to be mostly lead mining," Xavier explained as they walked. "Still some mining happening, but the big boom is past. Now we have got lumber mills, farms, dairy operations. It is a good town. Quiet most days, which is how I prefer it." "How long have you been sheriff?" Adelaide asked, grateful for the distraction of conversation. "Going on 4 years. I was deputy before that, took over when Sheriff Patterson retired. Grew up around these parts, worked cattle and then worked security for one of the mining companies before I figured out I had a knack for keeping the peace." He nodded toward a building with a star painted on the window. "Here we are." The sheriff's office was small but tidy. A desk dominated one corner, covered with papers and wanted posters. 2 cells occupied the back, both empty and clean. A pot-bellied stove radiated warmth against the spring chill. Xavier set her bags down carefully and pulled out a chair for her. "Sit." "I will make coffee," he said, moving to the stove where a battered pot waited. Adelaide sank into the chair, her leg aching from the long journey and the emotional blow. She watched Xavier move around the small space with economical grace. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and capable, the hands of a man who did his own work. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought one to her, along with a small jar of sugar. "I do not have cream, sorry. The general store is where I get supplies, and I usually drink it black anyway." He settled into the chair behind his desk, cradling his own cup. The coffee was strong and hot, and Adelaide wrapped both hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "What am I going to do?" she asked quietly, more to herself than to him. Xavier was silent for a moment, considering. "Mrs. Chen will give you a week at the boarding house while you figure things out. I will cover it." "I cannot accept that," Adelaide protested immediately. "I am not a charity case." "No, you are someone who received bad news through no fault of your own," Xavier said firmly. "This town failed you by not getting word to you in time. Least we can do is give you a soft place to land while you decide your next move." "And what moves do I have, Sheriff?" Adelaide heard the bitterness creeping into her voice and could not stop it. I have no money, no skills beyond basic household management, and I limp. Who would hire me? Who would want me? Xavier set down his coffee cup with a decisive thunk. First, you stop talking about yourself like you are broken merchandise. Second, we figure out what you are good at. Everyone is good at something. Third, this town has plenty of need. Mrs. Patterson, who runs the school, has been wanting help with the younger children. The general store is always looking for someone who can do accounts. The church needs someone to organize their charity work. He leaned forward, his green eyes direct and honest. You came out here willing to build a new life. That took courage. That same courage will serve you now. Adelaide stared at him, something loosening in her chest. You do not even know me. I know you got off that train alone, carrying your own bags, ready to marry a stranger and start over. That tells me plenty. He stood up. Come on, let me introduce you to Mrs. Chen. The boarding house was a solid two-story building with a wide porch and cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. Mrs. Chen turned out to be a small Chinese woman with iron gray hair pulled into a tight bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Adelaide up and down, then did the same to Xavier. Another stray, Sheriff? She asked in lightly accented English, but there was warmth beneath the tart words. This is Miss Adelaide Morrison. She was supposed to marry James Whitmore, but she arrived after his accident. She needs a place to stay while she gets her bearings. I will pay for a week. Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound. Your money is no good here for this. Any friend of James deserves help. He was a good man, that one. Terrible shame. She turned to Adelaide, her expression softening. You come. I have a nice room on the first floor, no stairs to bother you. Meals included. You look like you need feeding anyway, too skinny. Before Adelaide could protest or thank her, Mrs. Chen had taken one of her carpet bags and was heading inside, clearly expecting to be followed. Adelaide glanced at Xavier, who just tilted his head toward the door with a slight smile. She is like a force of nature. Best just go with it, he advised. The room misses. Chen showed her was small but spotlessly clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a mirror, and a wardrobe that smelled faintly of cedar. A window looked out over the back garden where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom. Supper is at 6 o'clock. No men in rooms, no drinking, no loud noise after 9 o'clock, Mrs. Chen rattled off the rules. You need anything, you come find me. I am usually in the kitchen or the parlor. She paused at the door. You are safe here, girl. Whatever you are running from or running to, you are safe here. After Mrs. Chen left, Adelaide sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. She wept for James Whitmore, a man she had never known but who had offered her hope. She wept for her own foolishness in thinking she could escape her past by running west. She wept from exhaustion and fear and the overwhelming uncertainty of her future. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out but oddly clearer, as if the storm had washed something away. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a young woman about her own age, with dark blonde hair and a friendly smile. Hello, I am Beth Hardy. I live in the room next to yours. Mrs. Chen told me you just arrived. I thought you might like some company, or if you would rather be alone, I completely understand. Beth spoke in a rush, her brown eyes kind. Company would be nice, Adelaide found herself saying. Please come in. Beth settled into the room's single chair while Adelaide sat back on the bed. Mrs. Chen mentioned you were supposed to marry James Whitmore. I am so terribly sorry. I knew James a little. He came to the shop where I work sometimes. He seemed like a decent man. What shop do you work at? Adelaide asked, grateful to talk about anything other than her own situation. The general store. I keep the accounts and help customers. The owner, Mr. Sullivan, is getting older and his eyes are not what they used to be, so he needs help with the record keeping. It is good work." Beth tilted her head, studying Adelaide with open curiosity. "What did you do back east?" "I lived with my aunt after my parents died. I helped her run her household, managed her correspondence, organized her social calendar. When she passed last year, her son inherited the house and made it clear I was no longer welcome. That is when I began corresponding with James." Adelaide found it easier to talk about than she expected. Perhaps because Beth listened without pity in her eyes. "Can you read and write well? Do numbers?" Beth asked. "Yes, quite well. My father was a teacher before he died. He made sure I had a good education." Beth's face brightened. "Then you must talk to Mrs. Patterson at the school and Mr. Sullivan at the store. They are both desperate for help. This town is growing, and there are not enough hands to do all the work." They talked until Mrs. Chen called everyone for supper. The boarding house dining room held a long table where 6 women gathered for the evening meal. Mrs. Chen introduced them quickly. Beth, whom Adelaide had already met, 2 sisters named Lucy and Margaret who worked at the dress shop, an older widow named Mrs. Boone, and a young woman called Sarah who taught music lessons. They welcomed Adelaide with genuine warmth, and over beef stew and fresh bread, she felt the first stirrings of something that might become hope. The next morning, Adelaide woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of birdsong. For a moment she forgot where she was, then memory rushed back. But somehow in the morning light, everything seemed less dire. She washed, dressed in her best day dress, a dove gray cotton with black trim, and went down to breakfast. After the meal, she gathered her courage and headed out to explore the town properly. The day was bright and clear, the air still holding a chill but warming as the sun climbed higher. She made her way to the general store, her limp pronounced but not painful. Inside, the shop smelled of coffee, leather, and pickles. Shelves lined the walls, packed with everything from fabric to firearms. An older man with a magnificent white mustache looked up from behind the counter. "Good morning, miss. What can I do for you? Are you Mr. Sullivan?" "My name is Adelaide Morrison. I am staying at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Beth Hardy mentioned that you might need help with accounts and record keeping." Mr. Sullivan's face lit up like sunrise. "Did she now? Bless that girl. Yes, I surely do need help. My eyes are not what they used to be, and the books are in a terrible state. Can you do sums?" Adelaide spent the next hour demonstrating her skills, going through his account books and inventory lists. Mr. Sullivan hired her on the spot, offering wages that were modest but fair, with the promise of more if she proved as capable as she seemed. She would start the following Monday, giving her a few days to settle in. Buoyed by this success, Adelaide next visited the schoolhouse. Mrs. Patterson was a brisk, energetic woman in her 50s, who ran the small school with firm kindness. She had 23 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, all in one room, and she admitted freely that the younger ones often went neglected while she worked with the older children on their advanced lessons. "If you could take the little ones for their letters and numbers each morning, that would be a godsend," Mrs. Patterson said. "I cannot pay much, but I can offer a small stipend. Between that and what Mr. Sullivan pays you, you should be able to manage." Adelaide felt dizzy with relief. 2 jobs in one day. It was not the life she had imagined, but it was a life, and one she could build with her own hands. She was walking back toward the boarding house, her step lighter despite her limp, when she nearly collided with Xavier coming out of the telegraph office. "Miss Morrison," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "you look pleased about something." "I found work," Adelaide said, unable to keep the smile from her face. 2 positions, actually, with Mr. Sullivan at the general store and with Mrs. Patterson at the school. Xavier's face broke into a genuine grin that transformed him from merely handsome to something that made Adelaide's heart skip. That is wonderful news. See, I told you this town had need of capable people. I have not thanked you properly, Adelaide said, for everything you did yesterday. You did not have to help me, but you did, and I am grateful. It was the right thing to do, Xavier said simply. He paused, then added, I am glad you are staying. Mineral Point is a better place with good people in it. They stood there on the wooden sidewalk, people flowing around them, and Adelaide felt an odd sort of connection humming in the space between them. Xavier seemed to feel it too, because he cleared his throat and shifted his weight. I should get back to work, he said. But if you need anything, my office door is always open. Thank you, Sheriff. Xavier, he said. You can call me Xavier. Then you should call me Adelaide. He touched his hat brim again and headed off down the street with that long, easy stride. Adelaide watched him go, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Adelaide rose early, had breakfast with the other boarding house residents, and then went to the schoolhouse where she spent 2 hours working with the youngest children. She discovered she had a knack for teaching, a patience that came naturally when working with 6- and 7-year-olds struggling to form their letters. From the schoolhouse, she went to the general store where she spent the afternoons organizing Mr. Sullivan's chaotic record-keeping system and helping customers. The work was satisfying in a way her life in Philadelphia had never been. There she had always felt like a burden, a spinster niece taking up space in her aunt's house. Here she was useful. People needed her. It made all the difference. She saw Xavier often. Mineral Point was small enough that paths crossed naturally. He came into the general store for supplies, stopped by the school to check that everything was safe and orderly, and ate supper at the boarding house twice a week because Mrs. Chen insisted that he needed proper feeding. Adelaide found herself watching for him, noting the way his face relaxed when he smiled, the careful courtesy with which he treated everyone, the quiet competence that marked everything he did. One afternoon in early May, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Adelaide was leaving the general store when she heard shouting down the street. She looked up to see a man stumbling out of the saloon, clearly drunk, waving a pistol in the air. People scattered, pulling children out of harm's way. Xavier appeared from somewhere, moving with swift purpose. "Danny, put the gun down," he called, his voice calm and commanding. "Not until Miller gives me my money," the drunk man Danny slurred. "He cheated me at cards. We can sort that out, but you need to put the gun down first." "You are scaring people." "Good, they should be scared." Danny swung the pistol around wildly. Adelaide's heart climbed into her throat as Xavier stepped closer, his hands open and visible. "Danny, think about your wife. Think about your little girl. You do not want them visiting you in jail. Put the gun down and let us talk about this like reasonable men." Something in Xavier's voice, some combination of authority and genuine concern, seemed to penetrate Danny's alcohol-fogged brain. The fight went out of him all at once. He lowered the gun, and Xavier was there instantly, taking it gently but firmly from his hand. Another man Adelaide recognized as the deputy, a lanky fellow named Tom, appeared to help escort Danny toward the jail. Xavier handed the gun to Tom and spoke quietly with him, then turned to scan the crowd. His eyes found Adelaide and he made his way over to her. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I should be asking you that," Adelaide replied. "You could have been shot." Xavier shrugged. "Danny is more mouth than action, especially when he is drunk. He just needed someone to listen to him. Turns out Miller did cheat him, so now I get to sort that out too." He studied her face. "You look a bit pale." How about I walk you back to Mrs. Chen's? They walked together, Xavier adjusting his pace to hers without comment as he always did. The afternoon sun slanted golden across the street, and Adelaide was aware of how safe she felt beside him, this man who walked into danger with steady courage and walked with her with infinite patience. "Does that happen often?" she asked. "The guns and the danger?" "Not as often as you might think. Mineral Point is generally peaceful. Sometimes the miners or the mill workers get too drunk and rowdy. Sometimes there is a dispute that needs settling, but mostly my job is making sure everyone follows the basic rules of civilized society." He glanced at her. "It is a good town, Adelaide. People here look out for each other." "I am starting to see that," she said softly. They had reached the boarding house. Xavier paused at the gate, his hand resting on the white-painted wood. "There is a church social this Saturday evening, potluck supper and dancing. I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you." Adelaide's heart leaped. "Are you asking to court me, Sheriff?" Color rose along his cheekbones, but he held her gaze steadily. "I suppose I am, if you are amenable to the idea." "I am very amenable," Adelaide said, warmth flooding through her. "I would be pleased to attend with you." Xavier's smile was like sunrise. "Good. That is good. I will collect you at 6 on Saturday then." Adelaide floated through the rest of the week. Beth and the other women at the boarding house were delighted by the news and insisted on helping her prepare. Lucy, who worked at the dress shop, brought over a lovely blue calico dress that had been ordered but never collected, adjusting it to fit Adelaide's slender frame. Margaret showed her how to dress her dark hair in a softer style that framed her face. By Saturday evening, Adelaide barely recognized herself in the mirror. Xavier arrived precisely at 6, wearing clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a dark vest. He had shaved and combed his hair back, and when he saw Adelaide, his eyes widened with unmistakable admiration. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They walked to the church together through the warm spring evening. Adelaide had worn her special boot, the one with the built-up sole that minimized her limp, but she still could not match a normal pace. Xavier, as always, adjusted his stride to hers so naturally that it seemed like they were simply strolling together with nowhere urgent to be. The church hall was festive with lanterns and spring flowers. Long tables groaned under the weight of food brought by the townspeople. A trio of musicians, fiddle, guitar, and accordion, played lively tunes in the corner. Children ran and played while adults talked and laughed. Adelaide was introduced to so many people her head spun, but everyone was welcoming. Xavier stayed close, his presence a steady anchor in the social whirl. After they had eaten, the dancing began. Adelaide felt a familiar anxiety twist in her stomach. She loved to dance, or she had before the accident, but her injured leg made the movements difficult and painful. She started to excuse herself, but Xavier caught her hand. "Dance with me," he said. "Xavier, I cannot. My leg. We will go slowly. I promise I will not let you fall." His green eyes were warm and certain. He led her onto the floor as the musicians began a slow waltz. Xavier's hand rested firmly at her waist, the other holding hers gently. He moved with her through the steps, his pace slow and measured, letting her set the rhythm. When her leg faltered, he was there, supporting her weight effortlessly, making it look like part of the dance. They turned slowly around the floor, and Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes because she had thought she would never dance again. And here she was dancing, held safe in Xavier's arms. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, though his eyes said he knew exactly what she meant. "For slowing down." Xavier smiled, that soft, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Adelaide, I would slow down every step for the rest of my life if it meant walking beside you." Adelaide's breath caught. They were still moving slowly across the floor, but the rest of the room seemed to fade away. There was only Xavier, his hand warm at her waist, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. When the song ended, they stood together on the edge of the dance floor, neither quite willing to step apart. Finally, Xavier cleared his throat. "Would you like to take some air? It is getting warm in here." Outside, the evening had deepened to twilight. Stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. They walked a little way from the church, following a path that led up a gentle hill behind the building. At the top, they could see the whole town spread below them, lights glowing warmly in windows. "I need to tell you something," Adelaide said, her courage gathering, "about why I came west." "You do not owe me explanations," Xavier said gently. "I want to tell you." Adelaide took a breath. 3 years ago, I was in a carriage accident. The carriage overturned, and I was trapped beneath it for some time before help arrived. My right leg was badly injured. The doctors did what they could, but it healed shorter than the other one and the bones did not set quite right. I limp now, and I always will. After that, the men who had been courting me disappeared. I became someone to pity, someone damaged. My aunt tried to hide me away at social events as if my limp was something shameful. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When James wrote to me through the matrimonial advertisements, he knew about my injury. I told him in my first letter because I did not want there to be any deception. He said it did not matter to him. I think that was why I agreed to come west, even though it was terrifying. Because someone finally saw me as more than just my limp. Xavier was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I am sorry that happened to you, not just the accident but the way people treated you after. That was not right." He turned to face her fully. "Adelaide, I see you. I see someone brave enough to cross half the country alone. I see someone who took a terrible blow and got up the next day and made a new life anyway. I see someone patient and kind with children, someone clever enough to untangle Mr. Sullivan's disaster of an account book. I see someone who laughs at Mrs. Chen's tart comments and who makes the best apple pie I have ever tasted." He reached out and gently took her hand. "I see someone I would very much like to court properly if she will have me. The way you walk does not factor into that at all, except that it gave me the chance to slow down and actually see where I was going for once in my life." Adelaide felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I would very much like to be courted by you, Xavier Whitlock." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Then we have an understanding." They stayed on the hill for a while longer, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Xavier told her about growing up on a small ranch, about how he had always wanted to be someone who helped people, about the loneliness of being sheriff in a small town where everyone knew you but few really knew you. Adelaide told him about her childhood, about her parents whom she barely remembered, about books she loved and dreams she had thought lost. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, like they had known each other for years rather than weeks. When they finally returned to the social, people smiled knowingly to see them arrive together, Adelaide's hand tucked into the crook of Xavier's arm. By tomorrow, the whole town would know that the sheriff was courting the new school helper. Adelaide found she did not mind at all. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Adelaide had experienced in Philadelphia. There, courtship had been a formal affair of chaperoned parlor visits and stilted conversation. Here, it was Xavier walking her home from the school every afternoon, carrying her books and talking about his day. It was him teaching her to ride a gentle mare from the livery stable, patient as she learned to balance despite her weak leg. It was picnics by the creek that ran through town, and evenings sitting on Mrs. Chen's porch talking until the stars came out. It was Xavier bringing her wildflowers he had picked on his rounds, and Adelaide saving him pieces of cake from the boarding house supper. It was Xavier always, always matching his pace to hers, never rushing, never impatient, moving through the world at the rhythm they created together. May turned into June, and the Wisconsin summer bloomed warm and green around them. Adelaide's life had a fullness she had never known before. She loved her work with the children at the school, loved the satisfaction of bringing order to Mr. Sullivan's books, loved the friends she had made among the boarding house women and the townspeople. But most of all, she loved the feeling that bloomed in her chest every time she saw Xavier. The way her heart lifted when his face creased into a smile meant just for her. One Sunday in late June, Xavier took her on a ride out to the countryside. They followed a winding path through rolling hills dotted with dairy farms and copses of oak and maple trees. Adelaide was becoming a competent rider, and the mare Xavier had chosen for her was patient and steady. They stopped beside a small lake, its surface glittering in the sunlight. Xavier helped Adelaide down from her horse, his hands strong and sure at her waist. He had packed a picnic basket, which he spread out on a blanket in the shade of a large oak tree. They ate cold chicken, cheese, fresh bread, and strawberries that Mrs. Chen had packed for them with a knowing smile. After they ate, they sat side by side, looking out at the water. Adelaide was acutely aware of Xavier beside her, the warmth of his arm almost but not quite touching hers. They had been courting for nearly 2 months now, and while Xavier had been unfailingly respectful, there was a growing tension between them, an awareness that hummed in the air whenever they were together. "Adelaide," Xavier said quietly, "I need to ask you something." Her heart began to race. "Yes." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. His green eyes were serious and tender at once. "I know we have not been courting very long by traditional standards, but I am 30 years old and I have met enough people in my life to know when something is right." "You are right, Adelaide. You are right for me in every way that matters. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love the way you bite your lip when you are thinking hard about something. I love your laugh and your stubbornness, and the way you take on challenges instead of backing down from them. I love you exactly as you are." Adelaide could not breathe. Joy and disbelief and hope warred in her chest. Xavier reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know I am just a small town sheriff. I do not have much to offer except a modest house, honest work, and a heart that is completely yours. But I promise you, Adelaide, if you will marry me, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making you happy. I will walk beside you at whatever pace you need for all our days together." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the sunlight. "Adelaide Morrison, will you marry me?" "Yes," Adelaide whispered, and then louder, "Yes, Xavier, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was pulling her into his arms, and Adelaide went willingly, pressing her face against his chest where she could hear his heart hammering as fast as her own. Xavier's arms wrapped around her, strong and safe, and she felt like she had finally come home. When they pulled apart, Xavier cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Adelaide kissed him back, pouring into it all the love and gratitude and joy that filled her to overflowing. They stayed by the lake until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, making plans for their future. Xavier wanted to marry soon, as did Adelaide. There was no reason to wait. They decided on mid-August, which would give them enough time to make simple preparations without dragging things out unnecessarily. When they rode back into town, Adelaide's ring glinting on her finger, Mrs. Chen took one look at them and clapped her hands together with delight. "About time," she declared. "I knew the moment that man carried your bags into my house that he was already half in love with you." The news spread through Mineral Point like wildfire. Everyone was genuinely happy for them, Adelaide realized. She and Xavier had both become woven into the fabric of this small community, and their joy was shared by their neighbors. The next weeks were a flurry of preparation. Adelaide and Xavier would live in Xavier's small house on the edge of town, a tidy 2-bedroom cottage with a front porch and a vegetable garden. Adelaide went with Lucy to the dress shop to choose fabric for a wedding dress. She selected a soft cream-colored silk, simple but elegant. Lucy worked magic with her needle, creating a dress that fit Adelaide beautifully. The skirt cut to drape gracefully and hide her uneven gait. Xavier, meanwhile, was building furniture for the house. He wanted everything to be perfect for Adelaide. He added shelves for the books she loved, refinished the kitchen table until it gleamed, and built a cushioned chair with a footstool so Adelaide could rest her leg comfortably in the evenings. They were married on a golden August afternoon in the small church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Adelaide walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Sullivan, who had kindly offered to give her away. She had eyes only for Xavier, who stood at the altar in his best suit, his face radiant with love. When she reached him, he took her hand and held it like it was something precious. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with warm sincerity. When it came time for the vows, Xavier spoke his in a voice that rang clear and true. "I promise to love you, honor you, and walk beside you all the days of my life." Adelaide's voice trembled but held steady as she made her own promises. "I promise to love you, trust you, and build a life with you full of joy and purpose." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed Adelaide with tender reverence, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held in the church hall, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Adelaide danced with Xavier, slow and close, and with Mr. Sullivan, and even with Danny, the man who had caused the disturbance months ago and who was now sober and grateful for Xavier's fair handling of the situation. Her leg ached by the end of the night, but her heart was so full she hardly noticed. As the evening drew to a close, Xavier and Adelaide slipped away to their new home. Xavier carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests that she was perfectly capable of walking. Inside, lanterns had been lit, casting a warm glow over their small parlor. "Welcome home, Mrs. Whitlock," Xavier said softly, setting her down gently. "I like the sound of that," Adelaide replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you, Xavier, for everything, for seeing me, for choosing me." "Adelaide, you are the best choice I ever made." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that to you every single day." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a discovery of each other that went beyond the physical to something deeper, a joining of souls that left them both awed and grateful. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, talking quietly in the darkness, making plans for the future, sharing hopes and dreams. The months that followed were the happiest of Adelaide's life. She continued her work at the school and the general store, though Xavier insisted she cut back her hours a bit. "You do not have to work yourself to exhaustion," he told her. "We have enough to live on comfortably." But Adelaide liked working. She liked feeling useful and valued. They compromised, with Adelaide working mornings at the school and 3 afternoons a week at the store. The rest of the time she spent managing their household, which she did with cheerful efficiency, and often accompanying Xavier on his rounds through town. People grew accustomed to seeing the sheriff and his wife walking together, his long stride perfectly matched to her shorter one, deep in conversation or comfortable silence. That first winter was cold but cozy. Xavier kept the stove going, and Adelaide learned to cook hearty meals that warmed them both. They spent long evenings reading together by the fire, or playing cards, or simply talking. Xavier told her stories about his work, the small dramas and disputes that made up the life of a frontier lawman. Adelaide shared the triumphs and challenges of teaching, the satisfaction of watching a child's face light up when a difficult concept finally made sense. On particularly cold nights, Xavier would rub Adelaide's aching leg, his strong hands working out the pain that winter always brought. She would have been embarrassed at first, but Xavier treated it with such matter-of-fact tenderness that embarrassment seemed foolish. He loved all of her, including the parts that hurt. Spring came again, and with it news that made Adelaide dizzy with joy and fear. She was pregnant. The doctor, a gruff but kind man named Dr. Brennan, confirmed it in early April. "You are healthy and strong," he told her. "Your leg should not cause any problems with the pregnancy or the birth, though you will need to be careful not to overdo things as you get bigger. Your balance will be affected." Adelaide told Xavier that evening as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset. She was nervous about his reaction. They had talked about children in an abstract way, but now it was real. "Adelaide, that is wonderful," Xavier breathed, his face transforming with awe. He pulled her into his arms carefully as if she were made of glass. "You are going to be a mother. I am going to be a father." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Are you happy about this?" "I am terrified and thrilled in equal measure," Adelaide admitted. "But yes, I am happy. So happy, Xavier." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Adelaide's belly swelled, and as Dr. Brennan had predicted, her balance became precarious. Xavier hovered protectively, insisting she rest more and work less. By July, Adelaide had given up her work at the general store, though she continued teaching the youngest children at the school through the end of the summer term. In early September, Mrs. Patterson found a replacement teacher for Adelaide, a young woman fresh from Teachers College in Milwaukee. Adelaide spent a few days training her, then turned her attention to preparing for the baby. Mrs. Chen and the other women showered her with help and advice. They held a quilting bee to make blankets for the baby. Lucy sewed tiny gowns and nightshirts. Sarah, the music teacher, carved a beautiful wooden rattle. On a crisp October morning, Adelaide's labor began. Xavier, who had faced down armed drunks and angry miners without flinching, nearly fell apart. He fetched Dr. Brennan and Mrs. Chen, then paced the parlor like a caged animal while the women attended Adelaide in the bedroom. The labor was long but not complicated. As evening fell, Adelaide gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a powerful set of lungs and a thatch of dark hair. When Mrs. Chen brought the baby out to Xavier, he took his son with shaking hands, tears streaming openly down his face. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered. "Adelaide did so well. She is tired but fine, strong as an ox, that girl. You can go in and see her now." Xavier found Adelaide propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing. He sat beside her carefully, cradling their son. "Look what we made," he said wonderingly. "He is beautiful just like his mother." "He has your hair," Adelaide said softly, reaching out to touch the baby's head. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Xavier looked down at his son, then at his wife. "How about Thomas, after Reverend Thomas who married us?" "Thomas Whitlock," Adelaide tested. "I like it. Thomas Xavier Whitlock. Perfect." Xavier leaned down and kissed her gently. Thank you, Adelaide, for everything, for giving me this family. Little Thomas was a good baby, though he kept them both awake with his frequent nighttime feedings. Adelaide nursed him and rocked him and sang to him, falling more deeply in love with each passing day. Xavier was a devoted father, walking Thomas around the house when he was fussy, changing his nappies without complaint, staring at him with wonder when he slept. That winter was hard with a new baby, but they managed. Mrs. Chen came by regularly with food and advice. Beth and the other women from the boarding house took turns visiting, bringing gifts and offering to hold the baby so Adelaide could sleep. Xavier's deputy, Tom, handled more of the sheriff duties, so Xavier could be home more with his new family. As Thomas grew from an infant to a chubby, laughing baby, the house filled with joy. He was crawling by 6 months, pulling himself up on furniture by 9 months, and walking unsteadily by his first birthday. Adelaide and Xavier threw a small party to celebrate, and Thomas smashed his face into a cake Mrs. Chen had made, to everyone's delight. Life settled into a new rhythm, busy but happy. Adelaide returned to teaching part-time once Thomas was old enough to be minded by Mrs. Chen for a few hours each morning. Xavier continued as sheriff, his reputation for fairness and wisdom growing as Mineral Point expanded. They added a small addition to their house, another bedroom for when Thomas was old enough to need his own space. When Thomas was 2, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news brought only joy, no fear. She knew what to expect, and she had Xavier beside her every step of the way. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Rose, arrived on a warm June morning in 1882. She had Adelaide's dark eyes and Xavier's strong chin, and she was just as perfect as her brother. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Xavier built a new cradle and Adelaide sewed new baby clothes, though Emma also wore many of Thomas's outgrown gowns. The house rang with children's laughter and occasional tears, with the organized chaos of a growing family. Adelaide sometimes paused in the middle of her busy days and marveled at how far she had come. 4 years ago, she had stepped off that train broken-hearted and terrified, with no future and no prospects. Now she had a husband who loved her deeply, 2 beautiful children, a home full of warmth, and a community that valued her. Her limp was still there, would always be there, but it had ceased to define her. She was not the woman with the limp. She was Adelaide Whitlock, beloved wife, devoted mother, respected teacher, valued member of the community. Xavier, too, had been transformed by their marriage. He had always been a good man, but love and family had softened some of his harder edges, brought out a tenderness that he shared generously with Adelaide and their children. He was known throughout the region as a fair lawman, but at home he was simply Papa, building toy horses for Thomas and rocking Emma to sleep with gentle songs. The years flowed past, marked by the milestones of a happy life. Thomas started school, learning his letters from the same books Adelaide had once taught from. Emma grew from a baby to a toddler to a bright little girl who followed her brother everywhere. Xavier was re-elected sheriff every time his term came up, the people of Mineral Point recognizing that they were fortunate to have him. Adelaide expanded her teaching work, eventually becoming Mrs. Patterson's official assistant teacher. In 1885, Adelaide gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Matthew James, the middle name in honor of the man whose death had brought Adelaide to Mineral Point. Matthew was a quiet, thoughtful baby who grew into a gentle boy, content to sit with his books while Thomas ran wild and Emma bossed everyone around. The house Xavier had expanded twice more, adding a proper dining room and a 3rd bedroom. The front porch where they had spent so many evenings courting was now often filled with children playing and neighbors visiting. Their vegetable garden had grown into something impressive, providing much of their food through the summer and preserving enough for the winter months. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Adelaide with a trip. Tom, who had been promoted to deputy sheriff and was more than capable of handling things, agreed to mind the town for a week. Mrs. Chen and Beth agreed to watch the children. Xavier and Adelaide took the train to Chicago, staying in a real hotel and seeing the sights of the big city. It was exciting and overwhelming and wonderful, but Adelaide found herself homesick by the 4th day. Xavier admitted he felt the same. They cut their trip short by a day and returned to Mineral Point with relief, scooping up their children who had been well cared for but who clung to them with the desperation of those who had been missed and missed in return. "I guess we are small-town people now," Xavier said that night as they lay in their own bed, listening to the familiar sounds of their home settling around them. "I guess we are," Adelaide agreed, "and I would not have it any other way." The children grew. Thomas developed a passion for building things, spending hours with hammer and nails creating increasingly complex structures. Emma discovered she had a voice like an angel and began singing solos at church. Matthew revealed a gift for drawing, filling paper after paper with detailed sketches of birds, trees, and people. Xavier taught all 3 children to ride, patient with their fumbles and fears as he had been with Adelaide. The children knew their mother walked differently than other mothers, but to them it was simply who she was, like Papa's green eyes or Emma's curly hair. They never thought of it as a flaw because their parents never treated it as one. In 1889, when Thomas was 11, Emma 9, and Matthew 4, tragedy struck Mineral Point. A fire broke out in one of the old mining buildings on the edge of town. It spread quickly in the dry autumn air, threatening several homes. Xavier organized the firefighting efforts, directing men with buckets and blankets, evacuating families from the threatened houses. The fire was finally brought under control, but not before several buildings were destroyed. In the aftermath, one family found themselves homeless. The Johnsons, a young couple with 3 small children, had lost everything. Xavier brought them to his house that night, Adelaide immediately setting about finding them food and blankets. The Johnsons stayed with them for 2 weeks while the men of the town built them a new house. Adelaide organized the women to provide clothing, dishes, and furniture. The community pulled together as Mineral Point always did when someone was in need. The incident reminded Adelaide once again how fortunate she was to be part of this town, this community that cared for its own. She thought about the life she had left behind in Philadelphia, the cold formality, the people who judged and measured worth by superficial standards. Here in Mineral Point, people were measured by their character, their willingness to help, their contribution to the community's well-being. Mrs. Patterson retired in 1890, and Adelaide was offered her position as head teacher. Adelaide accepted with pride and some trepidation. It meant more responsibility, but it also meant she could shape the education of Mineral Point's children in lasting ways. She expanded the curriculum, added more books to the school library, and started a program where older students helped teach younger ones, fostering a sense of community and shared responsibility. Xavier was proud of her, telling everyone who would listen about his brilliant wife and her work at the school. Their children were proud too, though Emma complained that having her mother as the head teacher meant she could not get away with anything. The years of the 1890s brought change to Mineral Point as they did to the rest of the country. The railroad expanded, bringing more people and more goods. Electricity came to town, a marvel that the children watched being installed with wide-eyed wonder. Telephones appeared, though they were still rare and expensive. The wild frontier was gradually becoming more civilized, more settled. Xavier's work as sheriff changed too. The rowdy frontier days were fading. There were fewer gunfights, fewer drunken brawls. Instead, his work involved more mundane disputes, property disagreements, the occasional theft. He did not miss the danger, but sometimes he felt like the world was moving too fast, leaving behind the simpler ways he had known. But through all the changes, the constants remained. Xavier and Adelaide, walking through town together at their own pace, his stride always matching hers. Their children growing and thriving, their home full of love and laughter, the community they had helped build and that had helped build them. In 1895, Thomas turned 17 and announced his intention to become a carpenter. He had been apprenticing with the town's master carpenter for 2 years, and his skill was undeniable. Xavier and Adelaide supported his choice, proud that he had found his calling. Emma, at 15, was still singing, her voice now trained by Sarah, who had continued as the town's music teacher. There was talk of her going to a music conservatory in Milwaukee, though Emma was undecided. She loved music, but she also loved Mineral Point and was not sure she wanted to leave. Matthew, at 10, was still the quiet one, content with his books and his drawings. Adelaide recognized something of herself in him, that inner life of imagination and thought. On a crisp October evening in 1896, Adelaide and Xavier sat on their front porch as they had done countless times over the years. The children were inside, Thomas working on a drawing of a house he planned to build, Emma practicing a new song, Matthew reading. The sounds of their family life drifted through the open windows. "You ever think about that day?" Adelaide asked softly. "The day I arrived. I think about it often," Xavier replied, reaching over to take her hand. "I think about you standing on that platform, looking lost and brave all at once. I think about how my life changed in that moment, though I did not know it yet." "I was so scared," Adelaide admitted. "I thought my life was over. I thought I would never have any of this, a husband, children, a home, purpose." "You have given me all of those things too," Xavier said. "Before you, I was just going through the motions. I was a good sheriff, but I was lonely in ways I did not even fully understand. You filled spaces in my heart I did not know were empty." Adelaide squeezed his hand. "We saved each other, I think. I think you are right." Xavier lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, as he had done so many times over their 18 years together. "And I would do it all again. Every step, every moment, all of it." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the Wisconsin sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in town, a church bell rang. A dog barked. Children called to each other in the distance. The ordinary sounds of ordinary life, which were really quite extraordinary when you paid attention. Adelaide thought about the journey that had brought her here, the train that had carried a broken-hearted woman with a limp to a town she had never heard of. She thought about the cowboy sheriff who had slowed his pace to walk beside her, who had seen past her injury to the woman beneath. She thought about the life they had built together, step by slow step, until it had become something beautiful and lasting. "I love you, Xavier Whitlock," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you, Adelaide Whitlock," he replied. "Forever." And in the gathering dusk, with the sounds of their family surrounding them and the town they had helped shape settling in for the evening, they sat hand in hand. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something extraordinary from that chance meeting on a train platform so many years ago. The years continued to unfold with their steady rhythm. Thomas married at 21, a sweet girl named Catherine who worked at the bakery. They built a house on the edge of town, with Thomas doing most of the carpentry himself. When Catherine became pregnant shortly after their wedding, Adelaide found herself preparing to become a grandmother, a thought that filled her with joy and made her feel wonderfully old all at once. Emma did eventually go to Milwaukee to study music, but she returned after 2 years, homesick for Mineral Point and the slower pace of life. She married the new doctor who had come to assist the aging doctor, Brennan, a serious young man named Robert who fell head over heels for Emma's voice and her spirit. They settled in a house near the church, and Emma continued to sing at every town event, her voice a gift she shared generously. Matthew surprised everyone by deciding to become a teacher. He attended the state normal school and returned to Mineral Point to teach alongside his mother at the school. Working together, they created a program that became known throughout the region for its quality. Students came from surrounding towns, and the school expanded to accommodate them. Xavier retired from being sheriff in 1902 at the age of 54. He had served for over 20 years, and the town threw him a celebration that lasted 2 days. Tom, who had been his deputy for most of those years, took over as sheriff. Xavier did not miss the work as much as he expected. He was content to spend his days helping Thomas with carpentry projects, playing with his growing number of grandchildren, and most of all, spending time with Adelaide. Adelaide continued teaching until 1905, when she was 50 years old. The children she had taught in her first years in Mineral Point were now adults with children of their own. She had shaped an entire generation, and the town honored her with a ceremony that brought tears to her eyes. Matthew continued as head teacher, carrying on the legacy his mother had built. In their retirement, Xavier and Adelaide traveled a bit, visiting the now grown children when they had moved to nearby towns, taking the train to see the sights they had missed while raising their family. But they always returned to Mineral Point, to the house that held so many memories, to the town that had become more than home. It had become part of their identity. Xavier's hair turned silver, and Adelaide's dark hair gained threads of white. Their pace slowed even more, but they still walked together every evening when the weather allowed, moving at the rhythm they had created over decades together. Young couples would see them and smile, knowing the story of the sheriff and his bride, the cowboy who had slowed down to walk beside her forever. In 1910, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. All 3 children came home with their families. Thomas and Catherine had 4 children now. Emma and Robert had 2. Matthew had married a teacher from a neighboring town, and they had 1 small daughter. The house overflowed with grandchildren, noise, and laughter. Adelaide looked around at the family she and Xavier had created and felt so full of joy she thought she might burst from it. That evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Xavier and Adelaide sat on their porch in the warm August darkness. The sky was thick with stars, the air sweet with the scent of Adelaide's flower garden. 25 years, Xavier said wonderingly. Where did the time go into this? Adelaide said, gesturing at the house, the town, the life around them. Into every moment we have lived together. Would you do it again? Xavier asked. If you could go back to that day on the platform, knowing everything that would happen, would you still step off that train? Adelaide looked at him, this man who had been her partner, her lover, her best friend for a quarter century. His face was lined now, weathered by time and sun, but his green eyes still held the same warmth they had that first day. Every single time, she said firmly. I would step off that train every single time, Xavier, because it brought me to you. He smiled and pulled her close, and they sat together as they had done thousands of times before. Two people who had found each other when they both needed finding, who had built a life of love and purpose and joy. The years after that grew gentler, slower. Xavier and Adelaide were content to let life move at its own pace now. They spent their days in simple pleasures, tending the garden, reading together, visiting with friends and family, watching their grandchildren grow. Adelaide's leg ached more now, the old injury protesting the passage of time, but Xavier was always there to help, to support, to slow his pace to match hers. They were known throughout Mineral Point and the surrounding county as an institution, the sheriff and his bride who had found each other through tragedy and built something beautiful. Young couples sought their advice. People told their story as an example of true love. And Xavier and Adelaide took it all with humor and grace, knowing that the real story was not in the dramatic moment of meeting but in the thousand small moments after. The daily choice to love and support each other, to walk together no matter what. In the autumn of 1918, Xavier fell ill with the influenza that was sweeping the country. Adelaide nursed him with fierce determination, refusing to let the disease take him. For 2 weeks, he burned with fever while she sat beside him, bathing his forehead, forcing liquids between his lips, praying with an intensity that surprised even her. And perhaps her prayers were heard, because Xavier pulled through when so many others did not. When he was finally well enough to sit up, weak but recovering, he looked at Adelaide with tears in his eyes. "You saved me," he said hoarsely. "You saved me first," Adelaide replied, taking his hand. 36 years ago on a train platform, this is just me returning the favor." They knew they were lucky. So many families in town had lost loved ones to the influenza. Emma, using her beautiful voice, sang at funeral after funeral, bringing what comfort she could to the grieving. Matthew organized relief efforts through the school. Thomas built coffins with tears streaming down his face, hating the work but knowing it was needed. The whole family pulled together, as did the entire town, supporting each other through the dark time. When the epidemic finally passed and life began to return to normal, there was a sense throughout Mineral Point of having survived something terrible together. The community bonds, always strong, became even stronger. And Xavier and Adelaide, having nearly been parted, cherished their time together even more. The 1920s brought new changes. The country was modernizing rapidly. Automobiles became common, and Thomas bought one of the new Model T Fords, thrilling his children with rides around town. The radio brought news and entertainment into homes. Women gained the right to vote, and Adelaide marked her ballot with pride, thinking of all the battles fought to reach this moment. Xavier and Adelaide slowed further, their walks growing shorter, their pace even more deliberate. But they still walked together when they could, Xavier's hand steady on Adelaide's arm, moving through the familiar streets of the town that had been their home for over 40 years. In 1925, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The town held a celebration in their honor, declaring it Xavier and Adelaide Whitlock Day. There were speeches and presentations, a dinner at the church hall, and dancing that went late into the evening. Xavier and Adelaide took one slow turn on the dance floor, moving to a gentle waltz just as they had at their first church social so many decades before. As they swayed together, Xavier leaned down to whisper in Adelaide's ear, "I meant what I said that night, you know. I would slow down for you forever." "I know," Adelaide whispered back, "and you have. Every day, Xavier, every single day." They were both crying and smiling, and their children and grandchildren and the whole town watched with love and respect as the old couple danced their slow dance, testament to a love that had endured and deepened through 4 decades of life together. Xavier lived to be 79, passing peacefully in his sleep on a quiet morning in 1927. Adelaide woke to find him gone, his face relaxed in eternal rest, and she knew that a part of her had gone with him. The funeral was the largest Mineral Point had ever seen. People coming from all over the region to pay respects to the man who had served as sheriff for over 20 years, who had been a pillar of the community, who had loved his wife with a devotion that had become legendary. Adelaide bore her grief with the strength that had carried her through so much of her life. She had her children and grandchildren around her, and they supported her with all the love she and Xavier had poured into them. She continued to live in their house, tending the garden, reading the books Xavier had shelved for her so long ago, sitting on the porch in the evenings and remembering. People worried she would fade quickly without Xavier, but Adelaide had reserves of strength that surprised even her. She had lived 53 years as Adelaide Morrison and Adelaide Whitlock. She would live the rest as Adelaide Whitlock, widow, but still herself, still strong, still purposeful. She lived another 8 years, dying peacefully at the age of 77 in the spring of 1935. She was surrounded by her children and many of her grandchildren, and her last words were, "Tell Xavier I am coming. Tell him not to walk too fast. I want to catch up." They buried her beside Xavier in the Mineral Point Cemetery, under a shared headstone that reads simply, "Xavier and Adelaide Whitlock, together forever." And the town mourned the passing of the last of a generation, the woman who had stepped off a train with nothing but courage and a limp, and who had built a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Thomas became a master carpenter, whose building still stood strong decades later. Emma's voice was remembered long after she was gone, people speaking of how she could make angels weep. Matthew educated hundreds of students, passing on the love of learning his mother had instilled in him. And their children, and their children's children, carried forward the lessons Xavier and Adelaide had taught. That love means meeting someone where they are, that strength comes in many forms, that a good life is built one step at a time together. And on certain summer evenings in Mineral Point, when the light slants golden across the old streets and the air smells of flowers and possibility, people swear they can still see them, the sheriff and his bride, walking together at their own pace. His stride matched perfectly to hers, moving through the town they loved with the contentment of those who found each other and never let go. The story of Adelaide and Xavier became part of Mineral Point's history, told to children and grandchildren as an example of what love should be. Not the dramatic, passionate whirlwind of romance novels, but the steady, enduring love that chooses each day to show up, to slow down, to walk together no matter what challenges come. Their house was eventually turned into a small museum, preserving the life they had built, the furniture Xavier had made, the books Adelaide had loved, the photographs of their family. And every year on the anniversary of their wedding, the town holds a dance in their honor. Young couples and old come together, and at some point in the evening, everyone does one slow waltz, remembering the cowboy sheriff and his bride, the man who said he would slow down to walk beside her forever, and who kept that promise every day of his life. It is a love story that reminds people that the grandest gesture is not in the dramatic moment but in the daily choice to love, to support, to adjust your pace so you can walk together. It reminds them that what we perceive as flaws or limitations can become the very things that teach us patience, compassion, and the true meaning of love. And it reminds them that sometimes the train brings exactly what we need, even if it does not look like what we expected. In the end, Adelaide Morrison stepped off that train in 1878 looking for a new beginning, and she found so much more. She found a town that embraced her, work that fulfilled her, and a love that transformed her. She found Xavier Whitlock, a man who saw past her limp to the woman she was, and who loved that woman with his whole heart for over 40 years. And Xavier, the cowboy sheriff who met that train expecting nothing more than to deliver bad news to a stranger, found the missing piece of his own life. He found Adelaide, who matched his strength with her own, who filled his house with warmth and his life with purpose, who gave him a family and a love that made every day worthwhile. Together, they built something beautiful. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and lasting and good. They walked together through joy and sorrow, through the everyday challenges and the unexpected trials, and they walked at their own pace, the pace they created together, the rhythm that was uniquely theirs. And that, in the end, is what makes their story worth telling and retelling. Not because it is extraordinary, but because it is not. It is the story of two ordinary people who chose each other and kept choosing each other, who built a life of love and purpose one step at a time, who showed that the greatest love stories are not about finding someone who completes you, but about finding someone who walks beside you, matching their pace to yours, sharing the journey wherever it leads. The train brought a bride with a limp to Mineral Point, Wisconsin in the spring of 1878. The cowboy sheriff said he would slow down so they could walk together forever. And he did, and they did, and their love became a legacy that outlasted both of them. A reminder to all who heard their story that true love is found not in perfection but in acceptance, not in rushing ahead but in walking together, and not in the destination but in every step of the journey shared.